I found the letter. 68 years old, and I felt like the ground had been pulled from beneath my feet, like I was in one of those dreams where you're falling and there's nothing to grab onto. The letter sat on my kitchen counter, cream-colored envelope with official seals, and the words kept swimming across the page no matter how many times I read them. The house was gone, sold. My home of 30 years, the place where I'd built everything that mattered, had been liquidated without my knowledge, without my permission, without my son even having the decency to look me in the eye when it happened. I stood there in that kitchen for what felt like hours. The morning light was coming through the same windows Margaret and I picked out together, back when we were young enough to believe forever meant something, back when a house wasn't just an asset or a commodity, back when it was shelter, home, proof that you'd built something real. The coffee maker gurgled in the corner, the old Mr. Coffee that she'd bought in 1998 and refused to replace because it still worked fine. That's the kind of practical wisdom she had. Make things last. Don't waste money on what's already good. Don't abandon something just because it's not new. I should have listened to her more carefully while she was alive. The thing about family secrets is that they don't announce themselves. They seep in slowly, like water under a door you didn't notice was cracked. You don't wake up one morning and suddenly realize your son has become a stranger wearing a familiar face. It happens in small moments, in phone calls that get shorter, in conversations that become more transactional, in the way his eyes started looking away from yours during family dinners. These are the symptoms, but you're too busy loving him to recognize the diagnosis. Let me go back to where things actually began to shift. Not to the moment I discovered the betrayal, to the moment I should have seen it coming, but didn't. I retired 5 years before that letter arrived. 63 years old after 40 years at the municipal engineering office. I was good at my job, reliable, thorough, the kind of person who finishes projects on time and doesn't cut corners. They gave me a watch when I left. A citizen watch with my initials engraved on the back, JH. Those letters still sit in a drawer upstairs. I don't wear the watch anymore. It feels too much like a memorial to the person I thought I was. My pension wasn't substantial, but it was stable. The house was paid off. We'd managed that in our 50s, worked extra jobs on weekends, made sacrifices. Margaret and I sat on the back porch when the final mortgage payment cleared, and we just held hands without talking. That's what financial security feels like when you've earned it yourself. It's not excitement. It's silence, peace, the absence of a particular kind of fear. I had money set aside too, not a fortune. $75,000 in savings, which seemed like a fortress back then. It felt like enough to last until 75 if I was careful, and I was always careful. Ask anyone who knew me. I don't spend money on things I don't need. I repair instead of replace. I clip coupons. I turn off lights when I leave rooms. These sound like small things, but they're the architecture of dignity when you're facing retirement. They're proof that you've been responsible with the life given to you. Marcus was 36 when he started his business. He'd been working in commercial real estate development for 10 years, doing well, making decent money, the kind of career trajectory that makes a father proud without being ostentatious about it. Then he decided he wanted more. He wanted to develop his own projects. He wanted to be the person making the decisions instead of executing someone else's vision. This desire I understood. It's in my blood. I recognized it in him because I felt it too when I was his age. That hunger to build something that's yours. I remember the conversation like it was yesterday. We were in the garage, the same garage where I taught him to change oil when he was 16. He was explaining the expansion plan, the development opportunity, the projected returns. He had spreadsheets, detailed financial projections, letters of interest from investors. He was thorough. That's where he got that from me. Dad, he said, and there was something in his voice that made me feel essential. I need capital to make this work. The investors will match 50%, but I need to come up with a significant amount to show serious commitment. It's about proving I have skin in the game. I listened. I asked questions. Not the right questions as it turned out, but I did ask, and somewhere in that conversation, the idea emerged, almost casually, like it was inevitable, that I could leverage the house. Use it as collateral, borrow against the equity I'd built. He made it sound so logical, so temporary. Just until the first phase sells, he said. 6 months, maybe a year. Then we pay it back and you're sitting on even more equity because the property values are rising. He made it sound like I wasn't taking a risk, like I was making a smart financial move. The paperwork started flowing after that. Documents arrived at the house, thick folders with highlighted sections and sticky notes, indicating where I needed to sign. There were so many pages, so many terms I didn't completely understand. Lines about second mortgages and equity lines of credit and derivative instruments, the vocabulary of modern finance. I read them, or at least I tried to, but I was 63 years old, more comfortable with analog thinking than digital complexity, and Marcus explained the parts that confused me. Or rather, his wife, Jennifer, my daughter-in-law, explained them. She was the detail person, the one who handled his business finances. "It's standard," she said, pointing to clauses with her fingernail. "Every development deal looks like this. You're not taking on unusual risk." I wanted to believe her. More than that, I wanted to believe my son. I wanted to be the father who supports his child's dreams, not the father who says no, not the father who's paralyzed by fear, not the father who makes himself an obstacle. So I signed. I remember the notary, a woman at the bank with kind eyes who asked me if I understood what I was signing. And I said yes, though I'm not sure that was entirely true. I understood the gist. I understood that I was putting my house up as security for my son's business venture. What I didn't understand, what I didn't want to understand, was what would happen if things went wrong. Margaret would have caught this. Margaret would have read every word and asked questions until she understood completely. She would have sat me down and said, "Robert, you love him, but love isn't the same as trust when it comes to legal documents." She said things like that, things that were true even when you didn't want to hear them. But Margaret was dead. She'd been dead for 2 years by that point, and I was alone in a big house learning how to exist without someone to check my impulses. Learning how to make decisions that weren't automatically validated by someone else's perspective. Learning, it turned out, how to make mistakes I didn't have a partner to catch. The business moved forward. Marcus was excited. Jennifer was excited. My grandson, their oldest boy, David, who was 24 at the time, was working in the business as a junior manager. It felt like a family enterprise. It felt like something I'd helped build with my sacrifice. It felt meaningful. The first year went well. The first phase of the development sold. Marcus and Jennifer bought a new house, much nicer than mine, with contemporary finishes and high ceilings and everything new instead of fixed and patched. They threw a housewarming party, and I went and felt proud. This is what you work for, I thought, so your children can have better than you had, so the next generation can build on your foundation. The payments on the equity line came out of my account automatically. That's how they were structured. Automatic withdrawals that I barely noticed after a few months because they were just part of the rhythm, like utilities, like property taxes, necessary costs of life. By the second year, I was starting to notice patterns. Marcus and Jennifer weren't together as much. There were awkward conversations at family dinners, silences where there used to be normal talk. Jennifer looked tired. Marcus looked distant. They mentioned something about business challenges, about the market shifting, about investors pulling back. Nothing that seemed like a catastrophe, just the normal stresses of running a company. I didn't ask many questions. I told myself it wasn't my place. I told myself that young couples go through rough periods and business has cycles. I told myself a lot of things that made it easier to stay quiet. The third year was when things started to get strange. I got a call from the bank, just a routine inquiry about my account status, checking if I was satisfied with my services, the kind of call they make to maintain customer relationships. But the representative mentioned something that made my stomach tighten. She said, "Just confirming you're aware of the recent activity on your equity line. We want to make sure all the transactions align with your intentions." I told her yes, of course, not thinking much of it. After she hung up, I pulled up my account online, something I'd been doing less and less frequently, trusting that things were proceeding as planned. The equity line had been drawn down significantly, $70,000 to be more precise. $70,000 that I'd understood would be used for his development business, for the project he'd told me was going well. I called Marcus that evening. He was brief, short. He said there had been some business complications, unexpected costs, but it was being handled. He said he'd explain everything soon. He said this in the way you say things when you're lying, with just enough detail to sound credible, but not enough to invite follow-up questions. I didn't push. That's what I replay in my mind now. I didn't push. I accepted the vague explanation, because pressing harder would have meant acknowledging something I wasn't ready to acknowledge, that maybe I'd made a terrible mistake. My daughter, Susan, Marcus's younger sister by 3 years, called me 3 days later. She lives in Colorado and we talk maybe once a month, but that call came out of nowhere, and she sounded worried. "Dad," she said, "are you okay? Have you talked to Marcus lately?" "He called the other day," I said. "Why?" "I ran into Jennifer at the grocery store when I was visiting Mum's friend," she continued. "Jennifer's mom lived in our town. She looked absolutely destroyed, Dad, like she hadn't slept in days. And when I asked how things were going, she just stared at me and then said, 'Ask your brother how things are going.' That's not normal. That night, I sat in the living room with all the lights off except for the lamp next to my chair. I sat with my hands folded, feeling the weight of something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't anger yet. It was something earlier than that. It was confusion. It was the sensation of ground shifting beneath your feet before you fall. But I still didn't do anything. I told myself it would blow over. I told myself that business ventures have complications. I told myself that Marcus would make it right. I told myself these things because the alternative, that I'd made a catastrophic financial mistake that could threaten my security in my final decades, was too large to hold in my mind. So I pushed it away. I made breakfast. I watered the plants. I went to my weekly coffee with the men from my old office. I lived my life with this growing dread that I was choosing not to acknowledge. Then came the morning the letter arrived. I read it 3 times, slowly, each word registering like a small shock. The house had been sold. The equity had been transferred. The property was now in the name of an LLC, a limited liability corporation, that I didn't recognize. The documents had been processed through a law firm in another state. The transaction had happened 45 days ago. 45 days ago. For 45 days, I had been living in a house I didn't own without knowing it. I had watered plants and watched television and made coffee in the kitchen in a home that wasn't mine. The disconnect between the internal world, my life, and the external reality of legal ownership was so profound that for a moment I thought there had been a mistake. This couldn't be right. This couldn't be what it looked like. I called Marcus immediately. No preamble, no how are you. I said, "Why does the bank have a letter about our house being sold?" There was a long silence. The kind of silence that's louder than words. "Dad," he finally said, "I was going to tell you. Things got complicated with the business. The deal fell through. Some investors backed out. I needed to liquidate her." "You sold my house without telling me?" I wasn't shouting. I was doing something worse. I was speaking quietly, with absolute clarity. "Marcus, you sold my house. The money's being reinvested." I hung up. I sat in that kitchen for the next 3 hours. The coffee went cold. The sun moved across the counter. And I began to understand with terrible clarity that the person I'd raised, the boy I'd taught to tie his shoes, to ride a bicycle, to treat people with respect, had become someone willing to betray his own father. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed in that house that wasn't mine and stared at the ceiling. The ticking of the clock on the wall downstairs, the same clock I'd listened to for 30 years, felt like it was marking time on a life that had somehow become unrecognizable. I thought about betrayal, about how it's not always an explosion. Sometimes it's a slow leak, a gradual erosion of trust so subtle that you don't notice until suddenly everything's gone. I thought about the moments I could have caught this, the questions I could have asked, the paperwork I should have read more carefully, the instincts I should have trusted. And I thought about something my father once told me. He said, "Robert, respect is something you have to earn every single day. You can't coast on it. One betrayal can undo decades of trust." I never imagined I'd have to apply that lesson to my own son. What I didn't know yet was that the house sale was just the beginning, that there was something much larger hidden beneath the surface, something that would force me to make choices I never imagined I'd have to make, something that would either break what was left of my relationship with Marcus or rebuild it on a completely different foundation. But little did I know what that next morning would bring. Part 2. The Reckoning. The week after discovering the house had been sold was the longest week of my life. I moved through it like I was underwater. Everything felt slow, distorted, like I was perceiving the world through something dense and resistant. I didn't want to tell people. I didn't want to have to explain to my friends that my son had stolen my house. I didn't want to say the words out loud because once you name a thing, it becomes real in a way that's impossible to deny. So I didn't tell anyone. Instead, I sat with it. I sat in my house, the house that wasn't mine, and I tried to understand how we'd arrived at this moment. I reviewed all the documents he'd asked me to sign, looking for the moment I'd missed, looking for some indication that this was always the plan, but the documents were deliberately obscure. That's what became clear as I read them more carefully. The language was designed to confuse. The structure was meant to obscure. This wasn't carelessness. This was calculated. I thought about calling a lawyer. I thought about that a lot. But I also thought about my grandson, about David, who I knew nothing about except that he worked for his father. David, who was only 2 years old when Margaret died. David, who'd never really known her, and who I saw maybe twice a year at family gatherings. What would it do to that boy to have his grandfather pursue his father through the legal system? What kind of family rupture would that create? I told myself I was protecting David by staying quiet, but I think what I was really doing was protecting myself from the consequences of having to face what my son had done. It was my grandson who finally broke the silence. He called me on a Thursday evening. I recognized his number. It had been programmed into my phone for years, but he rarely called. Texts occasionally, usually short. "Happy birthday, Grandpa," or "How are you feeling?" or "Saw you on Facebook." The calls were uncommon, significant. "Grandpa?" His voice was young, anxious. "Can I come by and talk to you about something?" "Not here, at your place, alone." I said yes without asking what it was about. Something in his tone told me this was important, that this was the thing that had been building beneath the surface, that this was the moment when something would crack open. He arrived at 6 o'clock. David had his father's height, his mother's brown eyes. He wore a button-down shirt like he was coming from an office, and he looked thin, exhausted. He looked the way I felt. We sat in the living room. I offered him coffee, and he said yes, though he barely touched it. For a long time, he didn't say anything. He just sat there with his hands wrapped around the mug, looking at something I couldn't see. Finally, he spoke. "Grandpa, I can't do this anymore," he said. His voice cracked slightly. "I can't keep lying, and I can't keep letting Dad lie. It's destroying everything. My relationship with Mom, my trust in him, everything. And I know what he did to you, and I can't stay silent about that." I felt something in my chest tighten. "What are you talking about, David?" He took a breath. He told me about the hidden account, about the money that had been moved offshore through a complicated structure designed to obscure its origins, about the $180,000 that had been accumulated over years, money that Marcus claimed was business income, but that had never been reported to his wife, never been reported to tax authorities, never been disclosed to anyone except a small circle of people who were helping him conceal it. "Dad asked me to help move money into it," David said, his voice getting quieter as he spoke. "He asked me to help him create false invoices. He said it was just for business structuring, that it was completely legal, that I shouldn't worry about it. But Grandpa, I knew. Even as he was saying it, I knew that wasn't true. And I did it anyway because he's my father, and I thought maybe I was being paranoid, maybe I was wrong. But then I started reading things online about money laundering and fraud, and I realized that's exactly what I was helping him do." I sat with this information for a long moment. My grandson was telling me that his father, my son, was not just a liar and a thief, but potentially a criminal, that he'd involved David in that criminality, that the betrayal was even deeper, even darker than I'd imagined. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I can't live with it anymore," David said, "and because I think you have a right to know. Because what he did to you, selling your house, taking your security, that wasn't just personal betrayal. That money went into that account. That money that he stole from you was part of what he was concealing." The words hit me like a physical blow. My house hadn't been sold because of business complications. My house had been sold because Marcus needed to liquidate assets to feed the hidden account, to feed his fraud. I asked David to tell me everything, every transaction he knew about, every instruction his father had given him, every detail he could remember. I had got a notebook and I wrote it all down. My handwriting got shakier as I wrote, my hand moving slower, like my body was registering shock that my mind hadn't fully processed yet. When David finished, he looked at me with eyes full of shame and fear. "Grandpa, what are you going to do? Are you going to tell the authorities?" I told him I didn't know, that I needed to think about it. But what I was really thinking was something simpler. I needed to see a lawyer. The next morning I called the law office where I'd worked on the estate after Margaret died. The lawyer I spoke with was named Patricia Chen. She'd been younger then, maybe 40. Now she was in her 50s, and she still had the same direct, no-nonsense manner that I remembered. She agreed to see me that afternoon. I brought all the documents, the equity line papers, the bank statements, the letters from the bank about the property transfer. And I brought David's information about the hidden account. I sat in her office, which was much nicer than it had been 7 years before, with better furniture and a view, and I told her everything. Patricia took notes. Her expression didn't change much as I spoke, but I could see her jaw tightening. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and was quiet for a long moment. "This is serious," she said. "What you're describing is potentially fraud. The sale of your house without full disclosure of the intention to liquidate assets and conceal income. The fact that your signature was obtained under false pretenses regarding the use of the funds. These are actionable items." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means," she said carefully, "that you have legal recourse. We can file a formal demand for restitution. We can potentially involve authorities, the IRS if there's tax fraud involved, law enforcement if the concealment rises to the level of criminal fraud. But before we go down that road, I want to be clear about something. This will damage your relationship with your son, significantly, possibly irreparably, and it will impact David, Your grandson will likely face legal questions about his involvement, even if that involvement was coerced. I thought about that. I thought about the choice I was facing. I could stay silent, accept the loss, and preserve some version of my relationship with Marcus. Or I could pursue the truth and accept the consequences of that truth. I need to talk to David, I said. And I need to talk to Marcus. I need to understand what happened before I decide what to do. Patricia nodded. That's reasonable. But Robert, I want to be clear. The longer you wait to take action, the more time your son has to conceal evidence or move assets further. If you decide to pursue this, we need to move quickly. I called Marcus that evening. I told him I knew about the offshore account. I told him I knew about David's involvement. I told him I wanted to meet, just the two of us, to understand what had happened. He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Okay, tomorrow, my office." His office was downtown, in a building with glass and steel, very different from the garage where we'd first talked about his business expansion. We met in the conference room, just him and me. He looked worse than I'd expected, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes. His hands shook slightly as he poured water from the pitcher on the table. "I can explain," he said immediately. "Then explain," I said, "not the version designed to make me feel better. The truth." He took a breath, and then he told me. The business had been struggling from the beginning. The projections had been overly optimistic. The market had shifted. Investors had pulled back. But he was too proud to admit that to me, too embarrassed to tell me that the venture I'd supported by leveraging my house was failing. So he started moving money into the hidden account. Not stolen money at first, money he was making from legitimate business activities, but wasn't reporting to his wife or to tax authorities because he was trying to build a financial cushion, a safety net, in case everything fell apart. "I told myself I'd come clean eventually," he said. His voice was flat, exhausted. "I told myself that once I got to a certain threshold, I'd use that money to pay you back for everything, that I'd explain it all, and you'd understand why I needed to do it." "Why did you need to do it?" I asked. "Because I was failing," he said. The words seemed to cost him something, and I couldn't let you see that I was failing. I couldn't let Jennifer see it. I couldn't let David see it. So I lied. I created a version of events where I was succeeding, where I was building something, where the money you gave me was being used wisely, and the lies got bigger and bigger until I couldn't maintain them anymore. I sat with that, with the image of my son building a false life, a false identity, a false version of success out of necessity and shame. "The house," I said. "Why did you sell my house?" "Because the account was being audited," he said. "A routine audit. Probably nothing would have come of it, but I panicked. I thought if there were large deposits coming from the equity line, if someone asked questions about where money was going, everything would unravel. So I liquidated the equity line quickly, moved it into the hidden account, and then closed the line by selling the property. I did it backwards. I did it in the wrong order. I was just trying to erase the paper trail before anyone looked too closely." "You did that without asking me?" My voice was very quiet. "You sold my home without asking my permission?" "I know," he said. "I know that was unforgivable. I know I betrayed your trust. I know." "You don't know," I interrupted. "You can't know what it felt like to get that letter, to find out that the one place I had left after your mother died, the one thing I'd built and maintained and protected for 30 years, was gone. Gone because my son decided to prioritize his lies over my security." He didn't respond. He just sat there, and I could see him trying to hold himself together. "Why would you involve David?" I asked. "I didn't," he started, then stopped. "I did. I'm sorry. I did. I told myself that teaching him about business structures and complex financial arrangements was educational, but I was really just using him, using his youth and his access to systems to help me conceal things. And when he started to realize what was happening, when he started to object, I put pressure on him. I made him feel like family loyalty meant helping me, even when what I was asking was wrong. I thought about David's face, about the shame and fear in his eyes, about the burden I'd carried at that age when I was becoming my own person and learning to separate my values from my family's demands. "He's going to have legal problems because of this," I said. "I know," Marcus replied, "and I accept that. I deserve whatever consequences come, and he should talk to a lawyer. He should get legal representation. What I did to him is worse than what I did to you because I'm his father, and I was supposed to protect him, and instead, I used him." We sat in silence after that. The conference room was quiet except for the ambient noise of the building, voices in the distance, the hum of the air conditioning, the sound of traffic 30 stories below. "What do you want?" he asked eventually. "What do you want me to do?" I thought about Patricia Chen's words. about the legal options available to me, about the fact that I could pursue this through the courts and potentially recover my money and my house, about the fact that I could involve authorities and watch my son face criminal prosecution. But I also thought about David, about the impact of a public scandal on his life, about the fact that Marcus was my son, and some part of me, the part that remembered holding him as an infant, teaching him to walk, believing in him with the uncomplicated faith that parents have, was still present in me. I want the truth, I said. I want all of it, documented, organized, complete. I want you to work with my lawyer to understand the full scope of what happened and where the money is, and I want you to make this right financially, even if that takes years. I want you to be honest with Jennifer and David and anyone else affected by this, and I want you to understand that respect, real respect, has to be earned back brick by brick, choice by choice, for however long it takes. I can do that, he said. I can do all of that. And one more thing, I added. You need to go to a therapist. You need to understand why you made these choices, because this wasn't about money, Marcus. Not really. This was about fear and shame and the desperate need to appear successful, and until you address that, you're going to make these choices again. He nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't try to defend himself. He just nodded and said, okay. The next month was chaos, in the way that truth creates chaos. David spoke to a lawyer and was advised that his involvement, while culpable, was mitigated by the fact that he'd come forward voluntarily. He faced the possibility of charges, but his cooperation meant that prosecutors were more willing to negotiate. Marcus worked with Patricia to document everything. The hidden account, the false invoices, the offshore structures, all of it laid bare. Jennifer found out. She was devastated, furious, betrayed in a way that shattered the foundation of their marriage. She moved out. She filed for divorce. She spoke to tax authorities, but she also told me, in a conversation I'll never forget, that she appreciated that I'd chosen truth over vengeance. You could have destroyed him completely, she said. You could have pursued every legal avenue and made sure he suffered maximum consequences. Instead, you chose a path that might actually lead to him becoming a better person. That's a kind of strength I didn't expect. I didn't tell her that I'd made that choice, partly out of love and partly out of self-preservation. Partly because I knew that if I pursued maximum damage to Marcus, I would become someone I didn't want to be. Partly because I was exhausted by betrayal and didn't have the energy to compound it with vengeance. The settlement was arranged through Patricia. Marcus would repay the full amount of the equity line, $70,000, plus the net proceeds from the house sale, which came to roughly $80,000. The total was over $150,000. He would make these payments over 5 years. It was structured as a formal agreement, legally binding, with penalties for non-payment. It wasn't enough to fully restore my financial security, but it was substantially better than nothing. And, more importantly, it was acknowledgement that what he'd done was wrong and required restitution. 6 months after the settlement was finalized, Marcus asked if we could have dinner, just him and me. I almost said no. The habits of caution had become strong by then, the assumption that any interaction with him would reveal another layer of betrayal, another hidden problem. But something in me understood that growth requires risk, that if I refused to engage, I was choosing to remain in a prison of resentment. We met at a quiet restaurant. Marcus looked better than he had in months. He looked like someone who was sleeping better, who was carrying less weight. I've been seeing a therapist, he said without preamble, for 3 months now, and I've learned some things about myself that I think you should know. I waited. I realized that I'd been terrified my entire adult life, he continued. Terrified that I wouldn't be good enough, that I wouldn't succeed, that I would disappoint you. And instead of sitting with that fear and being honest about it, I created this version of myself who had to be perfect, who had to be successful at any cost. And when I couldn't maintain that fiction, instead of admitting I was struggling, I just dug deeper into deception. He paused. He took a breath. What I did to you was unforgivable, he said. Selling your house, stealing your security, involving David in fraud. These aren't things that an apology fixes. They're things that I have to spend the rest of my life being accountable for. But I want you to know that I understand the damage, and I'm committed to earning back your respect, not assuming it or demanding it, but actually earning it through consistent, honest behavior. I listened, and for the first time since the betrayal, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness. Forgiveness is a complicated thing that takes time and repeated evidence of change, but something that might be its precursor, something like hope. I believe you're trying, I said. I don't know if that's enough yet, but I see that you're trying. That's all I'm asking, he said. just the chance to try. Over the next 2 years, things shifted. Not back to what they were. You can't go back to that. But forward to something different. Better, in some ways, because it was built on honesty instead of assumption. Marcus kept his payments. Every month the money came into my account exactly on schedule. He attended therapy consistently. He and Jennifer worked through divorce proceedings, and there was sadness in that, but also a kind of clarity. David faced some legal consequences but avoided significant jail time due to his cooperation. More importantly, David's relationship with his father changed. It became characterized by healthy skepticism, by boundaries, by a refusal to pretend that the betrayal hadn't happened, and that was growth too. I continued seeing Patricia, not as a lawyer, but occasionally as someone to have coffee with. I started a support group for people in their 60s who'd experienced financial betrayal or family fraud. It sounds like a niche thing, but the room was always full. Turns out there are a lot of us. A lot of parents who've been deceived by their children. A lot of people who understand that love and accountability aren't mutually exclusive. The house, the one that was taken from me, I eventually chose not to pursue recovery of it. By the time my legal rights were clarified, it had been sold again through the LLC, and the new owners had no involvement in the original fraud. Pursuing it further would have been expensive and would have affected innocent third parties. I had enough financial recovery that I could maintain my security, and I chose peace over total victory. I stayed in my apartment. It doesn't have the history that the house did. It doesn't have the cerejera tree or the garage where I taught my son to change oil or the kitchen where Margaret made limonada. But it's mine. It's clean and safe, and it doesn't hold the weight of broken trust. Some mornings that feels like enough. What I learned, and this is what I turn over in my mind on difficult days, is that respect isn't something you demand from your children. It's something they choose to give you when they see you stand firm in your truth, when they see you face betrayal and choose integrity over vengeance, when they see you hold people accountable while still maintaining compassion. That's not weakness. That's the most difficult kind of strength. Marcus and I have dinner once a month now. We talk carefully about his life, about David, about the progress he's making. We don't talk much about what happened. There's no need to keep relitigating it, but the awareness of it is present. It's the thing that shaped our current relationship, and it will always be that. But we've built something functional on top of it. Maybe someday it will be more than that. Maybe not. The truth is, I don't know if I've fully forgiven him. I'm not sure that's the right framework for what needs to happen between us. He harmed me. Deliberately, calculatedly, catastrophically. That doesn't erase, but neither does it define the totality of who he is or the totality of what our relationship can be going forward. It exists in the middle space, acknowledged but not absolutely determinative. At 68 years old, I've learned that families are more fragile than I believed when I was younger. I thought trust was something you established once and then carried forward forever. I was wrong. Trust is something you renew constantly, in small choices, in moments of accountability, in the willingness to be vulnerable even after being hurt. I've also learned that there's a kind of liberation in clarity, in knowing someone fully, including the parts that disappoint you. There's no more wonder about whether things are as they seem. There's no more magical thinking about family members. There's just reality. Complicated, painful, but also honest. Did I reclaim everything? No, I lost my house. I lost the version of my son that I believed existed. I lost the simple, uncomplicated faith in family that I carried for most of my life. But what I reclaimed is something harder to quantify but more valuable. I reclaimed my dignity. I reclaimed the knowledge that I could face profound betrayal and choose a response that was consistent with my values. I reclaimed the understanding that I was strong enough to hold people accountable while still maintaining compassion. And I learned something I want to pass on to anyone listening who's facing something similar. The family you thought you had is not always the family you actually have, and that discovery is painful. But sometimes it's the beginning of building something more real, more honest, more grounded, more capable of bearing the weight of genuine human connection. In the end, true family respect comes from the inside. It can't be demanded or inherited or assumed. It has to be earned again and again through consistent choices toward honesty and accountability. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family, only to reclaim your place by standing firm in your truth? Have you ever chosen accountability over vengeance and found that it healed something deeper than the wound itself? This is a work of fictional drama created for narrative entertainment. While it explores real themes of family betrayal, financial fraud, and elder empowerment, the characters, situations, and events are entirely invented. The story is designed to resonate emotionally with audiences who have experienced family conflict while maintaining complete transparency about its fictional nature. This is not presented as a real account, but as a dramatized exploration of how people navigate betrayal with dignity and wisdom.